Hi everybody, welcome. My name is Tammy from Homesteading in the City with Tammy. If you are new here, thanks for stopping by. If you've been here from the beginning, I really appreciate you coming by each week and watching the new videos that I put out. That really means a lot to me. Today's video is going to be a knitting video. If that is something that interests you, stick around. Hi everybody. I wanted to first start out and dedicate this video to my Gram, who has passed on. She left us last week. She is the one that taught me the love of yarn. She used to make beautiful handmade crocheted afghans and mittens and hats, and she always kept us in our homemade winter clothes all of our lives. She could never knit, but she could always crochet, and she's the one that taught me the love of yarn and made me want to do this with my hands. So this video is for her, to thank her for teaching me the love of yarn. We are going to go over cast on in this video. We are going to go over purling and knitting and casting off. I had a video already done, but it was way too long and it started before she passed away, so I figured I needed to cut it a little bit shorter. So we are going to do a video of just a cast on, a knit, a purl, and a cast off, and then we'll do another video to go into more detailed stitching. So stick around and we will start with a cast on. The items you need for today's video are going to be knitting needles, and I would suggest a size 10, 12 or larger. The bigger they are, the easier they are for you to hold on to when you are first knitting, and then a skein of a bulky yarn. That would be something, when they put the weight on them, would be something in the 6 range. So I would suggest to get those. And we will start with a cast on. I will do things in slow motion, so hopefully you guys are able to catch on to how I'm doing it. And we will start with that. So let's get ready for that. Okay, so I do a long tail cast on. We're only going to cast on about 12 to 14 stitches. When I go to measure, I can usually take it between my index finger and thumb, and I pull up to my elbow. That will give me about 10 stitches, I know, with this needle for casting on. So that's, you just have to get used to how much you have. I do a long tail cast on, but every tie is different, but that'll give you a good range to start, so you know how much you have. If you have a long tail at the end, then you know next time that you can, cut it a little bit, take a little bit less depending on the size needles that you have. Okay, so now that we have the amount that we want to cast on, you're going to take your hand like this, and you're going to put your yarn over your palm, and you're going to wrap it around your thumb. You're going to take your 2 little fingers, and you're going to hold on to the end of the yarn, because we want that yarn not to go anywhere. It's going to come around, and it's going to go behind your index finger. And then you're going to use your middle finger as kind of a tensioner to keep that tight around there. Now you're going to take one needle. Now you're going to take your needle and go between the back yarn that is by the thumb and over the index finger. Put your needle in and turn it around. That's your first stitch that you're putting on. Then you're going to bring it towards your thumb, and you're going to swipe up and catch the one that's by your thumb. Then you're going to catch the one in front of your index finger and wrap it through. Slide your thumb out. I got something else in there. Slide your thumb out, and then now you have 2 stitches on there. So now the next one's not so hard because we're not picking up an extra stitch. I do that because I have a hard time. A lot of people show you how to cast on by doing a slip knot with your first stitch. I have a hard time with when I put a knit into this stitch, it loosens on me quite a bit. So this keeps this stitch tight for me when I go and knit into it on my way back. So now you have your yarn like this, and you're just going to, and don't be afraid to use your fingers to control so that it doesn't slide off the end. You take the tip of your needle and you go in by your thumb, around, and catch the one in front of your index finger, and then you keep adding on just like that. So that is how you cast on. Now you can always do a slip knot if you can't get that beginning one to get the extra stitch there. You know, you can always do a slip knot. But for me, they've never worked. They're either too tight or too loose, and then I lose the stitch at the end. This one seems to just hold it for me. So we got 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 right there. Let's do 12. Okay. So now we have our 12 stitches on our one needle. Okay, so now that you have your stitches on your needle, you're going to rotate your needle and you're going to start knitting your stitches. Now you only work on the stitches that are on the front of the needle. We're not worrying about the stitches on the back. So a regular knit is always working with the front set of stitches here. When you knit, you go from, let me get my other needle, you go from left to right, put your needle in, grab your yarn. Now I always grab my tail and tie my tail in this way, just so that it doesn't start loosening and I don't lose this first stitch here. So it's going to go in, wrap around, and you got 2 of them. You can stop or you can go to weave your end. It would just be weaving your end in. If you do it now, you don't have to do it later. So we've got it weaved in. So you're going in from the left to the right. Wrap the thread around the tip of the needle and bring it through the loop. In, around, through, and you're only bringing it through that one loop that you're going in between, because you're going in between the 2 loops. So you're going in right by your needle, in, wrap around, and come out. In, wrap around, and come out. In, wrap around, and come out. Now, some people, I mean, it's really hard when you're first starting to be able to hold your needles, hold the yarn, and do everything. When I first started knitting, I used to brace the needle that had the stitches on it on my leg because they kept sliding and I couldn't, the needle would slide out of the stitches. Because when you're first knitting, you're probably not going to knit real tight. So you need to make sure, you know, any way that you can knit to hold your stitches on is the way you need to do it. Whatever works for you, don't think that it's going to be wrong because everybody knits completely different. I have not been able to, and I always wrap my yarn around my little finger, and that is my tightener and to give me my tension. A lot of people hold their yarn in this hand over here, and they use this finger as their guide. I've tried that. I can't do that. That's just not something I can do. I cannot do that. This, to me, is easier. I'm able to do this way. Now, when you get to, if you knitted your tail in, you have to remember to take both of these loops here. Otherwise, you'll add stitches on and you'll be wider. So just want to take both those loops, and then you can just take that tail and tighten it down in there so that it's not going to cause any issues. Okay. And see, now this is where you'd be able to just cut that right off, smooth, and you're done. You wouldn't have to worry about the tail at that point. If you are knitting where you need to know where your start point is, then I would leave only one. I would only stitch it into the first one and leave it hanging here on the corner so that you know where your start and stop is. If you need to know what is the front and the back of a pattern when you are doing one, then you would end up putting a stitch marker on the side that is, is your right side, so that you know that this is the right side if you've knitted your tail in. Okay, so again with the knit, you're going to go in from the left to the right, yarn around the tip of the needle, and bring it out. In from the left to the right, yarn around the tip of the needle, and bring it out. Okay, so now you can go ahead and practice that for a little bit. Okay, so now that you've practiced the knitting, let's go on to purling. Now, purling is basically, if you've been knitting all those rows, you're actually set up to purl, because purl basically puts a little scarf around the front of the needle of the stitch that you have. So let's go back to our stitch back here on the back side. These are all knits. See, as you can tell, there's no little scarf around in front of them. So that is a knit stitch. When we go to this side, we've got this little scarf right here around the front of our stitches. Now for purling, you are going to go in from the right to the left. And this is where it gets tricky to hold your needles, and that's, if you need to brace it, you got to brace it. Let me get some yarn here. Wrap it around the needle and go between. And again, we're only dealing with the front loop on our stitches. So we're going from the right to the left, under our needle, wrap the yarn around, pull it through. And I find it easier to wrap from the bottom to the top. This way, when I come through from the bottom, I'm pulling my yarn with the tip of my needle. A lot of people wrap this way. It's kind of the same thing. I mean, it doesn't really matter which way you wrap it. However you want to do it, it's still a purl stitch. It's whatever allows you to hold and drag the yarn easiest back and forth. Okay. So now that we have 2 purl rows in a row, you can really see the knit stitches, which are little V's. That you can see those little V's coming out there. Those are what you would consider a knit stitch. And these would be a purl stitch. So now if you wanted to purl this one, you got to have the yarn in the front. And this is where it gets to be a little bit tricky when you're not set up to purl and they want you to purl after you've knitted a row, or after you've purled a row and then they want you to purl the next row. You got to make sure your yarn is in the front. You're still going to do the same thing, but you got to make sure the yarn is in the front. Oops, get you in the screen here to be able to purl. Oops. Okay. So now we can really see our knit stitches from our purl stitches. Okay. But that is purling. So you want to make sure the yarn is in the front and you're going from the right to the left when you purl. You can see how I put the yarn through and then kind of pull it up and off the top of the needle. And you can see I use my finger a lot to hold my stitches on the needle that I'm trying to put them on so that they don't slide off. It comes with practice, and that's why it's easier to practice with a thicker yarn and a bigger needle so that you know you have something in your hand. When you start practicing with smaller needles, it just ends up being really hard to control the needles when they're little. And I would suggest doing the shorter needles that they have. They have some really long ones and they have some shorter ones. And your needles, when your regular needles, they have a stopper on the end, so they won't go back this far. But it's the point that if you don't knit tight, and as easy as it is, it slides right off. And it could be easily slid right off as you're working on it. So that's one thing you just have to make sure, and that's why it's good to hold it with your finger. Okay, so that is knitting and purling and casting on. They're really not difficult stitches. It does take some time to get used to doing each one of them. Now, most patterns will tell you when you cast off, they'll say cast off in pattern. I have never cast it off in pattern. I have always just cast it off in just a regular cast off stitch, which is basically a knit stitch. When you cast on, you're basically doing a knit stitch when you cast on. So I cast off the same way. So we're going to cast off and we're going to do it knitwise. So you're going to put your stitch through, or your needle through. We're going to do it knitwise. So you're going to put your stitch through, or your needle through, from the left to the right, pull your yarn over onto it. We have one on there. Then we're going to do one more. Then we are going to take this piece of this stitch and we're going to pull it up over off the end and holding that stitch on. And this is where your fingers really come in handy, because you can hold that stitch like that and stretch it and then pull it on. So that takes the stitch off. So again, we're going to purl or knit, get our stitch on there, and then we are going to bring it off the end. And if you're holding your stitches, and you can actually hold it, and then when you get a space, pull the stitch back like that so that so it doesn't come off. Because this is what was happening to me. I would start, and then here again, if you let go of this needle will slide right out of here. So it's, when you're new, it's all, fingers and thumbs and everything trying to get this to go the way you want it to. It can be very frustrating, and knitting is not supposed to be a frustrating thing. You're supposed to enjoy it. It's something that you're supposed to enjoy. It's probably frustrating when you first start, but it can be very enjoyable, very relaxing once you figure out how to do it and hold your needles. And a lot, they show you this perfect way to hold them. I'm not going to show you how to hold your needles the perfect way, because everybody holds them different. I still go back to that same way of holding them. When I've got slippery yarn and stuff is sliding out, I'll brace one of these needles on my thigh to cast off or to cast on or whatever, because it's the easiest thing for me to do. I don't want to lose the stitches. It gets very frustrating. And when I first started knitting, I didn't know how to fix my knits and my stitches, and I would have to restart, because when I dropped them, if I couldn't find them, I'd get frustrated and I would start all over, and that can be very frustrating to somebody just starting out. Okay. And you're always going to only have one stitch on the right hand needle, because this is the needle that we are actually moving everything off. We just put one stitch on there all the way across. And I remember when I first started casting off, I think I couldn't use the extra knit needle to pull the yarn over, and I think I used a crochet hook, and at one point I would stretch it out and I would just use my fingers to go over it. It's the motion that you have to get used to doing. The pulling the needle in and stretching the yarn helps, and as long as you don't keep this too tight when you cast off, you'll be able to have a good cast off that is not too tight. But that's how you can. And then you would just tie your knot, pull your yarn through here and tie a knot, and that would be how you would finish your stitching. So that is how you would cast on, knit, purl, and cast off. It's pretty simple. And I say that after years of knitting. It was very frustrating, I'm sure, when I first started to do this. But again, I learned by pictures in a book. I did not have YouTube to have a video to show me how to do it. I had snapshots of pictures of how you put your needle here, where you put your yarn, each step. I think YouTube videos are a lot easier now, because you can watch what they do, you can get your yarn ready, you can play the video, you can pause it, then you can do what they tell you. It just seems to be a little easier. And I still use, there's a couple of knitting tutorials that I still use to learn how to do a couple of things. So that is just, that's basically knitting, purling, casting on, and casting off, or binding off, however they refer to it as. Well, everybody, I hope you enjoyed this video. I wanted to go into more detail, but when I got into watching the playback of the other video that I did, it was really, really long, and I figured I would have lost most of you. So I'm hoping if I keep it short, it'll be something that you guys will be able to pick up on. And then I will do another video in a couple of weeks on some of the stitches that you can do once you have mastered knitting and purling and casting on and casting off. So, well, everybody, I hope this video was informative for you and you were able to learn how to cast on, purl, knit, and cast off. If you like this video and you have not already subscribed, please consider doing so. Smash that like button and give me the notifications to the thumbs up. I really appreciate it. And also comment down below. I would love to hear from everyone. And as always, thanks for stopping by, and I will see you on the next one. Bye.